Coronavirus spreads to Shanghai as China confirms 217 cases by late Monday. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson pushes for deeper trade ties with Africa as Brexit nears. And as the US prepares to reduce number of troops in Africa, what impact will this have for North Africa? Hello and welcome to Africa Live. We're coming to you live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers, and here with the latest in your business news is Penina.
Thank you, Hannah. And coming up on Africa Live Business, the IMF forecasts Rwanda's economy to expand by 8% this year. And South Africa Airways remains in business despite government missing its funding deadline. I'll have the details of those stories and plenty others in just a bit. For now, it's back to you, Hannah.
Thank you so much, Penina. We'll see you in just a bit. In the meantime, Shanghai has confirmed its first case of the novel coronavirus-related pneumonia this evening. Earlier, China's health authorities say that as of 6 p.m. on Monday, 217 cases had been confirmed. That included 198 cases in Wuhan, 5 in Beijing, and 14 in Guangdong province in the south. Meanwhile, 7 suspected cases have been reported. Wuhan authorities have confirmed a third death. Meanwhile, transport authorities in China are implementing measures to prevent the spread of the disease. CGTN's Zhao Kunfei reports from a railway station in Wuhan.
If you come to any railway station here in Wuhan, you will see the just-equipped body temperature detector. Now, the purpose of that is to prevent passengers who already got fever from traveling and possibly prevent the spreading of the novel coronavirus. Once they just enter the hall, I can smell the disinfectant fluid. When they see any suspected case, the case will be sent to the medical staff nearby. It is a very new measurement following the health department says some of the cases they found had no history of exposure to a seafood market where was believed the only source of the outbreak. Local health authority doesn't deny a possibility of human-to-human transmission. The train station in particular is just a few hundred meters away from the seafood market. Just in 40 days of Spring Festival travel rush period, more than 5 million passenger trips can be made from here at Hankou Railway Station. CGTN visited this railway station 2 weeks ago, but when we return, we see today there are more people wearing masks. But it's not odd at all, given the fact that this is the winter season, as many people wearing masks to prevent other diseases as well. Chinese people are quite familiar with coronavirus. SARS is also one kind of coronavirus. The outbreak of SARS came amid New Year period in 2003. The novel virus in Wuhan doesn't seem to be aggressive as SARS, despite number of pneumonia patients are expected to rise. WHO says it does not recommend any measures for travelers so far, and it released a statement saying that it advises against the application of any travel restrictions on China based on the information currently available. Zhao Yunfei, CGTN, Wuhan, Hubei Province.
Meanwhile, cases of the new type of coronavirus have also been reported outside China. South Korea confirmed 1 case on Monday. In Japan, a man in his 30s tested positive for the virus. He was hospitalized after returning from Wuhan. Thailand has also reported 2 cases of the coronavirus. Airports in Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea, and Malaysia have been testing passengers from Wuhan. Travelers flying from Wuhan to the U.S. will also undergo enhanced health screenings. The country's Disease Control and Prevention Center has deployed around 100 additional staff to assist with screening. Meanwhile, China says it is working with multiple parties to deal with the new coronavirus. At a press briefing on Monday, a foreign ministry spokesperson said Beijing was in close communication with the World Health Organization as well as other relevant parties. He called on other countries to immediately inform China of any suspected cases.
After receiving notification of pneumonia cases from the relevant countries, China has attached great importance to them. We are maintaining close communication and strengthening cooperation with all parties. If other countries also find suspected pneumonia cases, we welcome them to inform China straight away to reinforce preventative work. We'll work with all parties to tackle the epidemic and safeguard global health security.
We move to the UK now, where British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has called for deeper investment ties between Britain and Africa. He was speaking at the UK Africa Investment Summit taking place in London. The summit will bring together 21 African countries with UK and African companies. This is the first time governments and businesses from the UK and Africa have come together for an event of this scale. After securing Britain's departure from the European Union, Prime Minister Johnson is keen to develop business ties with countries outside of Europe.
More than half the world's 15 fastest growing economies are in Africa. 2/3 of African economies are expanding faster than the global average. Africa is the future, and the UK has a huge and active role to play in that future. We want to build a new future as a global free trading nation. That's what we're doing now. That's what we'll be embarking on the 31st of January of this month. But I want to intensify and expand that.
European Union top
for their supposed inability to take on these Islamic extremists, be they Al-Qaeda or IS. Now, the conference also said that it would step up its strategic cooperation with the region. The EU is the largest contributor to both humanitarian aid, in particular, to these 5 countries: Niger, Chad, Mali, Burkina Faso and Mauritania. And I think they're looking to step that up. No word, though, no specifics on any military backup. At the conference in France last week, where President Macron met the 5 leaders of these countries, they agreed to combine forces under a single command structure there in the region. They also want to set up a special operations task force, bringing in special ops troops from Europe. What we were hoping to hear was whether there was any confirmed commitment to that, but no word so far.
Thank you so much for that, Michael. I suppose we are going to be just keeping an eye on that and waiting for more news, and particularly what you've just mentioned now, that commitment. Thank you so much, Michael Voice, joining us live there from Brussels. Well, to Libya now, where there is hope that peace could be returning there. World leaders agreed over the weekend to respect a United Nations arms embargo and put pressure on different factions to reach a political solution. Meanwhile, the country's internationally recognized Premier Fayez al-Sarraj says Libya will face a catastrophic situation unless foreign powers put pressure on Eastern-based commander Khalifa Haftar to lift a blockade of oil fields that has cut outputs to almost zero. Since Friday, Haftar's forces have closed Libya's major oil ports in a power play.
I hope that the international community understands the depth of this problem. I hope that they understand that stopping the only source of revenue for Libyans will cause a problem here. From our side, we have nominated 5 people, and they are now waiting to meet their 5 counterparts. But on an individual front, we have passed that point, and the idea of sitting with Khalifa Haftar aside is entirely rejected. We truly hope that the military committee will do its job. There are a lot of details to discuss, such as the mechanisms taken towards a ceasefire, how we will manage various fronts. There are a lot of details which should all be discussed professionally and with one voice by the officers.
We're staying with that story, and our correspondent Adel El-Marouchi now reports from Cairo on what impact the Berlin conference could have on the Libyan conflict.
At the peak of the fighting over Tripoli in August, Germany has started to move with the UN to bring peace in Libya. But world leaders have rushed with this meeting only when tensions between Egypt and Turkey appear to be turning into a proxy war in Libya.
That escalation has reached in the last few days a very dangerous dimension. Until now we had an escalation of a Libyan conflict with some foreign interference. Now we were facing the risk of a true regional escalation. And that risk was averted in Berlin, provided, of course, that it is possible to maintain the truce and then to move into a ceasefire.
Weil die We talk to them individually because the difference between the two parties are still of such a magnitude that don't speak to each other for the time being. They did not actively participate in the conference. They were not in the same room, but they were in Berlin. That allowed us to brief them of the discussion that happened.
No matter how promising Berlin appears to be, analysts believe that it could not be implemented, at least for now.
Any agreement that does not suit the Libyan National Army won't be implemented unless it's included stopping Turkish intervention and dissolving the militias. A lasting ceasefire depends on the militias. Al-Sarraj has no authority over them. Actually, there's no power in Libya which is capable of implementing any agreement on the ground.
For that particular reason, the UN has proposed forming a 5+5 military committee formed from 5 representatives from the LNA and 5 from the GNA. It will be the first UN committee which is linked to the forces fighting on the ground. In Berlin, General Khalifa Haftar has announced his representatives for the 5+5 military committee. Its formation is now complete. The UN says the committee will convene within the next few days in Geneva to start discussing how to turn the ongoing truce into a fully fledged ceasefire. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Well, it's time now for us to take a short break and return. More news making headlines, including Egypt hopes for final deal over Ethiopia's Nile Dam in Washington talks later this month. And Somali army recaptures Middle Juba in latest offensive. Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. Well, Chairman of the U.S. Joint Chief of Staff General Mark Milley has announced that his country will be withdrawing troops from Africa to serve in the continental U.S. or to be shifted to the Pacific. The U.S. has about 7,000 special forces spread in several African countries with a military base in Djibouti. But what is the presence of troops in North Africa and the impact of such withdrawal? Yasser Hakim explains.
The U.S. claims it has no military bases in North Africa. However, U.S. troops have been present in several occasions in the region.
The main focus of tensions in North Africa is Libya. The U.S. is currently observing events and assigning its allies missions in Libya, but it has been directly involved before. Intervention is not always using troops, but it launched air raids and drones, so some of the cooperation with North African countries is in providing airports for U.S. Air Force.
U.S. forces have operated in Tunisia and Morocco as well recently. The main aim of these forces is to help fight terrorist groups. But now U.S. President Donald Trump has announced an exit of troops from Africa. Experts, however, say there will still be U.S. presence in the north of the continent.
There will always be military cooperation and military advisors will remain in Africa. Some troops as well. An exit doesn't mean total withdrawal. Besides terrorism, there are U.S. fears of the growing influence of Russia and China in Africa. Therefore, will remain in one form or another, even if it doesn't officially admit it.
North African countries are suffering from the threats of terrorism. Being allies to the U.S. with vital political and economic interests make it inevitable that the U.S. will continue its military presence in the region. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
The army in the Democratic Republic of Congo says it has killed a senior commander of a Rwandan rebel group that's been operating in the east of their country. General Wilson Irategeka was the leader of the National Liberation Front, a Hutu militia that's fighting against President Paul Kagame's government. CGTN's Christo Chamringa reports from Kinshasa.
The Congolese army says General Wilson Irategeka and 20 of his fighters were killed in a battle in Luindi in North Kivu province last Wednesday. The rebels are reported to have fallen in an ambush laid by the Congolese troops. General Irategeka was a member of the Hutu soldiers who fled to the DRC after the Rwanda Patriotic Front took over power in Rwanda in 1994. His National Liberation Front militia has been seeking to overthrow the government of President Paul Kagame, but many of their fighters are reported to have been killed in a military offensive that the DRC army launched last year. Last September, the DRC army announced that it had killed Sylvester Mudachimura, a senior commander of the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda. Congolese officials say their troops have captured many strongholds of rebels from neighboring countries. A multitude of armed groups are based in eastern DRC. The UN estimates that there are more than 100 of them in the war-torn region. Christo Chamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
On to Somalia now, where the army says it has made significant progress in the fight against Al-Shabaab after capturing strategic areas used by the group to attack civilians and security forces in southern Somalia. From Mogadishu, CGTN's Abdulaziz Billah has more.
Security forces opened fire on enemy targets along a strategic road south of the country. The operation's end goal is to capture Middle Juba, the only region currently under the militant group Al-Shabaab's control in the Jubaland state. Troops from the regional administration, backed by the country's national army and special forces, are also hoping to secure a key supply route that links Mogadishu and Kismayo.
Our forces overpowered the militants in all these areas. We managed to kill at least 27 militants and pushed the rest back. The objective of this latest offensive was to deny the group a chance to launch attacks near urban centers.
At least 6 strategic villages were captured in Sunday's operation near Jamame, a major Al-Shabaab stronghold. Army officials say they managed to destroy roadside bombs planted on the main road aimed at slowing down Army's progress.
During the operation, security forces unearthed 12 landmines along the Mogadishu-Kismayo highway. Al-Shabaab planned to set them off without a clear target. The road is mostly used by civilians, but luckily we managed to destroy the landmines.
Jubaland state is strategically located as it borders neighboring Kenya, where recent attacks have claimed several lives towards the northeastern and coastal towns in Kenya. Last year, the group killed close to 30 people after storming a popular hotel in the port city of Kismayo. And last month, close to 100 people were killed after an Al-Shabaab suicide bomber detonated a truck bomb along a busy intersection in Mogadishu. Government forces are beginning to retake and hold towns in regions initially perceived as key Al-Shabaab strongholds, mainly in southern Somalia. Analysts say that recent military successes in the lower Juba and lower Shabelle regions is an indicator that the country's army is ready to take over security responsibility.
Our international partners have been useful in assisting during operations. They assist us in carrying out aerial surveillance and strikes on militant targets. This has ensured that our forces achieve great success in the battlefield.
African Union troops are due to leave the country soon. But for now, stabilizing major urban centers and reopening key supply routes will be essential in securing the country from a decades-long insurgency that continues to affect several countries in East Africa. Abdulaziz Billah, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
A mass grave with up to 270 bodies has been opened to the public in Burundi's capital, Bujumbura. The government allowed families to sift through the crumbling remains to try to find remains of their long-lost loved ones. Burundi's history includes colonial occupation, civil war, and decades of intermittent massacres. In 2018, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was set up to investigate violent conflicts since independence in 1962. In a report to Parliament, the Commission said that it had identified more than 4,000 mass graves across the country and an estimated 142,000 victims.
Very soon, in different parts of the country, we have plans to organize a burial worthy of these remains, but temporarily we are keeping them somewhere in boarded bags for the bones. As for the personal materials found in the graves, if I can call them so, we are going to store them where they can be protected from all kinds of bad weather or disturbances.
Egypt, Sudan and Ethiopia are set to meet on January 28th following a preliminary agreement that was reached during talks in Washington over sticky issues pertaining to the Renaissance Dam. The dam built by Ethiopia on the River Nile has caused a stir in Egypt. Cairo says the operations of the dam could affect the water flow from the River Nile to Egypt. Here's Yasser Hakim with reactions from Cairo on the preliminary agreement reached last week.
The principal agreement reached in Washington has been welcomed by the government here. A statement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs says the mechanism for filling the Renaissance Dam conforms with Egypt's demands.
The problems are related to the filling of the dam, and they have agreed that the filling will take place during the rainy season in July, August and September. It will not be filled during the drought period so that it does not affect the water flow to Egypt or cause any drought in Egypt.
Ethiopia says it might begin the process of filling the dam in the end of 2020. The developments in the Renaissance Dam issue has been the main headline for the media and social circles. It's been a source of concern for all Egyptians throughout the years of negotiations. Egyptians feared the dam would cut the only source of water for the country, the River Nile, and the news of the developments in Washington were met with cautious optimism.
It's a good deal, but we want to reach a comprehensive agreement that will ensure the safety of Egypt in the future. It has to be completely solved because the Nile is our life.
Will Ethiopia adhere to any deal? This is my concern. We need guarantees that Ethiopia will not renege on the agreement it will sign.
But the deal is not finalized yet. Officials from Ethiopia, Sudan and Egypt go into another round of talks on the 28th of January in Washington, and experts here say it will be a crucial 48 hours of negotiations.
Egypt will demand a binding agreement that ensures the filling will not harm its water share. Also important is the management and operation of the dam. The operation of the dam has to be monitored by an international party that will guarantee a fair treatment to all three countries.
Egypt wants to ensure there are basic principles put in place for the future, that if any country wants to build dams, it should be accepted by downstream countries. It should also guarantee that dams will never affect Egypt or Sudan's water share. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Meanwhile, the Ethiopian government says a dam on the River Nile will begin producing power this year, despite talks with Egypt and Sudan. Egypt has expressed concern that the dam will impede water flow to the country. CGTN's Kelechi Wanjohi reports from Addis Ababa.
Since Ethiopia began constructing the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam on the River Nile in 2011, Egypt has objected to the project. The dam is expected to reduce flooding in Sudan, but Egypt insists that it will receive less water flow downstream to its territory. Ministers from Sudan, Egypt and Ethiopia met in Washington last week. The Ethiopian government says the talks produced important progress.
After discussing the issues raised on the previous technical meetings, the ministers agreed to continue the technical meetings until January 28th and deliver the result. As we understand from their joint statement announcement on the next technical discussions, the issues that expected to get solutions are the releasing of water, filling program, the sustained cooperation, and on drought and on the length of drought seasons.
As a compromise, the three countries agreed that Ethiopia will fill the dam reservoirs during the wet season between July and August. This will ensure that Egypt never receives less water because of the dam activities. During the months with low rainfall, there will be no dam reservoir filling. The water will flow directly into the turbines to provide electricity for Ethiopia. At full capacity, the dam needs 74 billion cubic meters of water. Ethiopia's Ministry of Water says this plan will allow them fill the dam with at least 84% of the required water within 4 years. Many members of the public are concerned, having helped fund the construction of the dam through the lottery and direct donations.
Politically, this dam is so important in terms of Ethiopia's ability to develop her water resources like any other resources to support the economic development of the country, especially to get the country free from poverty, and that is a big problem. Everybody knows that.
Observers say the Nile water conflict is far from being fully solved, but the Washington talks have resulted in a feeling of goodwill from the countries involved.
This is in an environment where there is greater international involvement and scrutiny and a little bit of pressure on the parties to reach an agreement. And further to that, particularly from the Egyptian perspective, Ethiopia hopes to start filling the reservoir later this year when the rains begin. So Egypt really is running out of time to strike a deal. So for a number of reasons, it looks like the parties, the pressure is on a bit more and the parties are hopefully edging towards a detailed agreement.
The three countries will meet again later this month in Washington, D.C. It is hoped that an agreement can be signed to avoid further conflict. Colette Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, I'll be standing by for more current affairs making headlines across the continent. But for now, the latest in business news with Penina.
Thank you, Hannah. Coming up in business news tonight. The IMF forecasts Rwanda's economy to expand by 8% this year. And South Africa Airways remains in business despite government missing its funding deadline.